Congratulations! You've made it through Act 1 of our Sonic X-treme adventure. But now, it's time for us to head into the special stage. So jump into that giant ring, hit that checkpoint. It's time for you to find out about the stories of Sonic X-treme. And there's a lot of them. 7 in total, 1 for each of the Chaos symbols. And we're going to go over them in as much detail as possible separately. Away we go! So, our first story originates way back in the 32X and Mega Drive/Genesis era. This was when a TV show was still being used as a basis for the story, which at the time was called Sonic Mars, just like the game itself. We actually know a lot about the game during this time because the script was made available online. It goes into detail about the characters, the acts, the special stages, but more importantly, the story, which was Sonic the Hedgehog, hero of Mobius, running around the Great Forest smashing badniks, stopping Robotnik, doing what he does. But meanwhile, back at Knott's Hole Village from the TV show, the Freedom Fighters, joined by Knuckles, have discovered an odd signal coming from one of Dr. Robotnik's evil computers. It turns out it's a distress signal from a virtual reality world known as Micro Mobius, which has been taken over by Dr. Robotnik, who finds out about the Freedom Fighters and finding out about him, and kidnaps them, taking them into the world. Naturally, Sonic isn't too pleased about this when he gets back and finds no one, so he follows in after them. And that's pretty much the basic premise of the story. In the game, Player 1 was limited to playing only as Sonic, but Player 2 had a choice. Oddly, there was only 2 characters usable from the show, Sally and Bunny. They're joined by Tails and Knuckles from the games, and after each stage you'd save one of them and it would give Player 2 the option to play as them. However, there was also a 5th mystery character. Meet the game's original character, Tiara Bobowski? Well, don't worry, she didn't look like this at this point. She looked like this. A bit more basic, I guess you could say. In this version of the game, she was a princess, and her name wasn't quite as complicated at this point. It was Tiara Cyberowski. She was the daughter of King Cyberowski, who was the king of Micro Mobius, the virtual reality world, which would technically make her a virtual reality person. Her species was a Manx, as was her father's, and the idea behind her was to give Sonic another love interest to rival Princess Sally. At the end of the game, you actually were given a choice. Once you saved Tiara, in I believe Act 5, Sally would appear on screen and walk off one way. Tiara would then walk off the other. Sonic would then have to choose between them, and that would become the playable character for Player 2 in the final stage. Now, before we go on to the next story, there is some other information I want to tell you because it's all very interesting. There was 6 zones in total. Zone 1 was King Gambit Zone. Zone 2 was Icebreaker Zone. Zone 3, that was Fat Tuesday Zone. I don't get it either. Zone 4 was Dreamweave Zone. Zone 5 was Cryptic Grotto Zone, and finally Zone 6 was Core Memory Zone. There was also special stages designed in the script, as well as a bonus stage where you play air hockey against Robotnik. I know! Awesome, right? Finally, the most interesting thing is the title screen called it Sonic on Mars. So maybe there was a bit of a title change considered at one point in the game's development. But I also want to go over the problems with Robotnik's plans. 1. Why? Why take over a virtual reality world? 2. Why not conquer Mobius when the Freedom Fighters are in the virtual reality world? 3. Why not just delete the virtual reality world and get rid of Sonic? No one else seeing this? Next story. After the events of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles, Angel Island is back in the sky and the Death Egg has crashed to the Earth. Our heroes head on home. But Robotnik is nowhere to be seen, and Sonic isn't too happy about this. So he asks Tails and Knuckles to go find them via biplane, whilst he searches the land on foot. But then disaster strikes. Tails and Knuckles go missing. Turns out they've been captured by Robotnik, who has also somehow got the Master Emerald, which he believes is the great power inside. So he blows it up. There is a great power inside. 6 shadowy creatures, but they're not very friendly. They attack Robotnik, Tails, and Knuckles and hold them hostage, whilst then, in their black smoky forms, take over Robotnik's machinery and turn it against him. By this point the game has swapped systems, because the name of the story is Sonic Saturn. The aim of the game was to rescue Tails, Knuckles, and Robotnik, and there was no Tiara in this version of the tale. Like before, there were 6 zones in total, and we know Act 1 was called Orange Groove Zone 0, and the final zone was set in the mechanical city of Grodius. Interestingly, the idea of the Master Emerald being cracked and the power being released by Robotnik was reused in Sonic Adventure. So the next story opens like this. Dear Sonic, please come to the castle. I baked we should go on a date. Get here soon. Sincerely, Princess Cyberuski. Tiara. Yeah, that's pretty much the plot. Sonic has to go on a date with Tiara, who's back, but it's getting dark. So he's got to get there quickly, otherwise she's going to be quite annoyed with him. But unfortunately for our blue hero, Dr. Robotnik has found out and he's like, oh, I'm gonna get that Sonic one day. And he flies off in his Eggmobile and decides it's the perfect time to use a super doopy whammy laser, which ends up warping all of reality. That's right, the entire planet gets turned into some weird twisted world, which means Sonic's going to have a lot of trouble getting there, and the longer he takes, the more annoyed Tiara is going to be. So to make it up to her, he's decided to collect the 7 Chaos Emeralds and turn them into a necklace for her. I know, kind of a bit of a trivial use for them, but hey, there you go. So he runs off on his adventure through several different zones. And this time round there were 7 zones, probably because he had to get the 7 Chaos Emeralds. Zone 1 was Circus Theatre, Zone 2 was Gadget Mall, Zone 3 was Mayan Tombs, Zone 4 was Blackjacks, Zone 5 was Deep Seas, Zone 6 was Mad Traffic, and Zone 7 was Inferno. This game also had Tiara vision after every level, so the longer you took, the more annoyed she'd be, which meant the game had multiple endings, so it had tons of replayability at this point, and I think it's a really cool idea, but probably not best used for a main console title. Our game opens with Tiara being hung from a rope above a bed of spikes, and her name has been changed from Tiara Cyberuski to Tiara Boobowski. Never mind, let's just call her Tiara B. So Sonic rushes in and saves her, but this might have been a mistake. As she reveals, it was an evil trap set by Dr. Robotnik, who laced the ropes that bound her with poison, poisoning both her and Sonic. Fortunately, she knows someone who can help over the misty mountains cold. But Sonic doesn't have to travel through dungeons deep and caverns old, he just takes his biplane and flies over there. Turns out the man he's been sent to see is actually Tiara's father. The character who's originally King Cyberuski has been turned into a professor. A Professor B. Seriously, why is that name so complicated? He tells Sonic to collect the cure ingredients to help get rid of his poison, and he will have to go into several different zones to collect them. The gravity in these zones is a bit odd, he says, meaning Sonic can run on the walls. This was an excuse as to why the new gameplay mechanics were there. So he teleports Sonic inside and flies away. So then, several cure ingredients later, Sonic returns with the final ingredients, only to discover things aren't quite all what it seems. For it turns out that Dr. Robotnik has captured the Professor, for he was originally poisoned to begin with, and made Sonic go collect the cure items. So in a climactic final showdown, Sonic defeats him and gets the cure. So get this. After the events of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, nobody checked on the Master Emerald. Dr. Robotnik just steals it back. Then he takes it back to his lair and blows it up again. This time it's even worse than the previous story, because he manages to poison himself by doing so. But don't worry, he has a plan. Cut to Tiara suspended over a bed of spikes. A rope binding her, Sonic rushes in and saves the day. But this might not have been a good idea, for she reveals that it was a trap set by Robotnik, who laced the ropes that bound her with poison. And doesn't this all sound a little bit familiar to the previous story? Well, yeah, you would be right. You see, Sonic Doom was sort of a revision of Sonic Boom, but there were a lot of changes. For one, Robotnik was now not the only villain, there was also the Chaos Doom, which takes control of the Badniks to stop Sonic from finding a cure. Like Chaos later would be, it was trapped inside the Master Emerald released when the Doctor blew it up, much similar to the Chaos Elementals in that previous story. The cure items are also a lot stranger in Sonic Doom compared to Sonic Boom, like herbs, an old shoe, a gumball, a laser cannon, and the Badniks have been mutated by the Chaos Doom into an organic metal hybrid, which would have been pretty damn scary. There are a lot of other information we need to include, such as the time limit. There was a time limit to the Xtreme, you had less and less time each act, and an overall time limit in the game, much like, think Majora's Mask, without the option to set it back. Take too long and Sonic dies from the virus. Game over. There was even a planned sequel put in place where Sonic would have to reseal the Chaos Doom in the Master Emerald. After Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Angel Island is back in the sky, but this time the Death Egg has been blasted off into space. Seemingly, Dr. Robotnik has disappeared for good. Now, overjoyed by this, Sonic goes on a well-needed rest and goes for a run through the Arctic, when suddenly he's attacked by a giant robotic spider, which proceeds to knock our blue hero out. When he awakens, he finds himself in space and in one of Dr. Robotnik's traps. Annoyed by this, he jumps out the window and has to get home by running through the various different zones and planets. After the events of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Angel Island is back in the sky, but Dr. Robotnik has returned with a Death Egg larger than the planet itself. This presents a bit of a problem, as you would expect, but Tails has the great idea to send Sonic straight to the Death Egg to tell the Doctor off. Unfortunately, the Death Egg is so large, it's ripped other planets out of orbit, and one of these planets intercepts the beam, meaning Sonic crash lands on the Jungle Planet. There he meets various different creatures known as MIPs. We think this is what they look like, we can't be too certain, it's just an odd image found in one of the files. Could be they look nothing like it, but they were going to be piloting the Badniks in this game that Sonic had to save. He'd have to go to various different planets to stop Robotnik and get to the Death Egg. Now, this was the last story that was made before the ultimate cancellation of the game, and was written by a different team of people. We'll go over why next episode. It's a long story, as you can expect. Interestingly, like Sonic Adventure, which shares ideas with the previous stories, this has a lot of similarities with Sonic Colors, from one travelling from planet to planet to stop Robotnik, and Sonic being the only playable character. Also, in Sonic Colors, there's creatures known as Wisps. Could the MIPs and the Wisps be connected? Maybe this game did come out after all. Wait. Another story? You said there was only 7. Sort of. You see, between Sonic Doom and Sonic PC in 1996, there was a series of articles in the magazine Game Players. This article was called The Red Shoes Diaries and went over the development process of Sonic X-treme. A lot of the information we know about it comes from these articles. For one, we also got Tiara's final design from this, not in colour, but that's what she finally looked like. But it also mentioned another story that we never hear about anywhere else. The story went something like this. Sonic gets a Blue Streak distress call and runs over to meet Tiara and the Professor, who are in this version the creators of the rings and guardians of the Rings of Order. Now Robotnik, only just noticing these rings for the first time, I know, how did he not notice these things, they're everywhere, goes off to get the Rings of Order, and they send Sonic off to get them before he does. It was later confirmed by Chris Zen, the lead developer of the game if you recall, that this was created solely for having a story in the Red Shoes Diaries and was never actually considered. But because of this, it's the one people know most. Now let's talk about Tiara before we end things off here. She had a lot of designs, a lot to say the least. But her preferred design, and the one that shows up most often, is this one here. Now, this is the one that was preferred most by Chris Zen, who designed her, but it was thought that this didn't quite portray her personality. She looked a bit too cute, and she was meant to be sort of spunky, able to keep up with Sonic, able to beat Sonic on occasions, so he redesigned her to see the design you see on the right, but he later confirmed that he actually preferred this original one, which I think I do as well, actually. So, that ends off this episode, but in the next From Concept to Console, we've still got a ton of stuff to go over. For one, there's still a lot more engines to go through, a lot more development strains we've got to go through, and it gets really quite depressing for the developers themselves. See you next time, guys.